In the earliest centuries of the Imperium's expansion, there existed a time that later generations would remember not as history, but as legend. It was an age spoken of in hushed reverence by archivists and remembrancers, an age when humanity did not yet fear its own shadow, and when the stars themselves seemed to open willingly before the advance of Terran fleets. The Imperium was young then, newly risen from the long night that had scattered and divided mankind, and its banners carried not only the authority of conquest, but the promise of unity long denied. Terra, ancient cradle of humanity, stood at the center of this great awakening. Its scarred continent, once broken by war and neglect, had been drawn together beneath a single sovereign will. From its towering citadels and vast orbital docks came vessels of impossible scale, forged in the certainty of purpose and guided by a vision that reached far beyond the fragile present. These ships, clad in burnished armor and bearing the sigils of the newborn Imperium, moved outward into the void with patient determination, crossing distances that would have once been unthinkable. At the heart of it all stood the Emperor. He did not walk among the masses, nor did he speak to them in ways they could easily understand. His presence was distant, veiled behind layers of command and symbol, yet it was felt in every decree and every advance. To those who served in his name, he was not merely a ruler, but the embodiment of humanity's restored destiny. His will flowed outward through countless chains of command, carried by generals, captains, and warriors whose loyalty was absolute and unquestioned. Few ever beheld him directly. Fewer still could claim to understand him. Yet his purpose was clear. Humanity would be made whole again. Across the void, expeditionary fleets pressed onward, their journeys guided by fragmentary records and ancient signals that hinted at lost colonies scattered during the Age of Strife. Many of these worlds had endured in isolation for centuries, their cultures reshaped by necessity and survival. Some had preserved fragments of old knowledge. Others had fallen into regression, their people clinging to rituals born of fear and ignorance. Still others had risen to unexpected strength, forging their own empires in the Emperor's long absence. Each discovery was met with measured resolve. Compliance, it was called, a word spoken with calm authority, devoid of cruelty in its sound, yet immense in its consequence. When a world accepted the Emperor's truth, its people were welcomed into the growing Imperium. Their industries were restored or expanded, their defenses strengthened, their place secured within the vast and ordered design. The Imperium did not see itself as a conqueror, but as a restorer of rightful unity. Division had been the source of humanity's suffering. Unity would be its salvation. And so the fleets moved onward. At their forefront traveled warriors unlike any who had existed before. They were the Legiones Astartes, the Space Marines, created through arts that blended science and mastery beyond the comprehension of ordinary men. They were not merely soldiers. They were instruments of certainty, shaped to endure hardship without hesitation and to act without doubt. Their armor bore the colors of their legions, each distinct, each bound to a lineage that stretched back to the Emperor himself. To behold them was to witness the Imperium's will made manifest. They descended from the heavens in ordered silence, their arrival often marking the end of resistance before a single word had been spoken. Yet they were not creatures of mindless destruction. They carried with them the authority to judge, to offer the chance of peaceful union before force was ever employed. Many worlds, upon seeing these warriors, chose acceptance without conflict. Others did not. But in those early years, victory was not in question. The Imperium advanced with momentum that seemed unstoppable, its fleets growing in number with each passing decade. Forged worlds awakened to their ancient purpose, their machine factories roaring back to life beneath the guidance of the Mechanicum. Shipyards labored without rest, crafting vessels that would carry the Emperor's vision ever farther into the dark. Entire populations dedicated themselves to the singular purpose of expansion, their lives bound to a destiny larger than themselves. There was certainty in those days, certainty and belief. Among those who carried the Emperor's will, none were more revered than the Primarchs. They were figures of immense presence, beings whose origins were shrouded in mystery and whose capabilities exceeded even those of the Space Marines they commanded. Each Primarch embodied a fragment of the Emperor's design, their leadership shaping the character and achievements of their legions. Where they walked, history was written. Their voices carried authority not because it had been granted, but because it was inherent within them. Warriors followed them without hesitation. Worlds yielded to them without resistance. They were both generals and symbols, living proof that humanity had transcended its former limitations. In their shadow, the Imperium flourished. And yet, even at the height of this expansion, the Emperor himself remained apart. He did not lead every campaign personally, nor did he appear at every moment of triumph. Instead, he observed from a distance, guiding the greater shape of events while entrusting the execution of his vision to those he had created. His attention was fixed not on individual victories, but on the totality of humanity's future. There were works underway on Terra itself, endeavors of such scale and secrecy that only the most trusted servants were permitted knowledge of them. To the Imperium's countless citizens, this distance did not diminish their faith. It strengthened it, for the Emperor was not merely present in form, but in purpose. His absence from the battlefield was seen not as neglect, but as evidence of a design so vast that no single campaign could define it. Each world brought into compliance was another step toward an end that only he could fully perceive. The stars themselves became markers of humanity's rebirth. Ancient roots, once lost, were charted again. Dead systems were reclaimed. New fortresses rose where none had stood before. Humanity, which had once been scattered and vulnerable, was becoming something unified and enduring. There were moments, however, when the vastness of this undertaking became evident even to those who served within it. In the quiet hours between deployments, when fleets drifted in silent formation and the light of distant suns flickered against their hulls, there were those who reflected on the enormity of what had been achieved and what remained unfinished. The galaxy was vast beyond comprehension, its depths holding wonders and dangers alike. No matter how far the Imperium advanced, there were always more stars waiting beyond the horizon. Still, confidence endured. For every hardship, there was progress. For every lost world, there were 10 reclaimed. The Imperium's strength grew not only in numbers, but in certainty. Its people believed in the inevitability of their triumph, in the righteousness of their cause, and in the unbreakable unity that bound them together. It was an age defined not by doubt, but by purpose. And in that purpose, there was peace of a kind rarely seen in the long history of mankind. Far above countless worlds, the Emperor's fleets continued their silent passage, moving ever outward into the unknown. Their engines burned with steady light, carrying with them the hope of a species that had endured extinction and refused to yield. Behind them lay the darkness of humanity's forgotten past. Before them lay a future not yet written. And in the stillness between those two infinities, the Imperium endured, strong, certain, and unafraid, unaware how fragile even the greatest unity could one day prove, as the stars watched in silence and the long, patient night waited beyond the edge of sight. In the expanding silence between the stars, the machinery of the Great Crusade advanced with unwavering precision. Each fleet, vast beyond mortal scale, carried with it not only soldiers and weapons, but the fragile continuity of human purpose. The void was no longer an empty abyss to be feared, but a passage, one that bore the Imperium forward, step by measured step, toward a destiny defined long before most of its servants had been born. At the center of every expeditionary fleet stood its commander, a figure upon whom rested responsibilities that extended far beyond victory or defeat. These leaders did not simply wage war. They carried the Emperor's authority into regions where his presence would never physically reach, and in doing so, they became the visible embodiment of his will. Their decisions shaped the fate of entire civilizations, determining whether the world would rise into unity or fall beneath the consequences of resistance. Among these commanders were the Primarchs, whose authority existed not as a matter of rank, but as an extension of their very being. They were more than strategists. They were architects of compliance, interpreters of a vision that could not be spoken in full. Their minds moved with clarity that surpassed ordinary comprehension, perceiving patterns within the chaos of interstellar expansion. Where others saw uncertainty, they saw inevitability. Where others hesitated, they acted with calm and final resolve. Their presence brought certainty to those who served beneath them. Within the command decks of their flagships, surrounded by the steady rhythm of instruments and the silent vigilance of their warriors, they considered the unending procession of worlds awaiting rediscovery. Each system represented both a question and an answer. Some would accept unity without hesitation, recognizing in the Imperium the return of something long lost. Others would resist, shaped by centuries of isolation into forms no longer aligned with the Emperor's design. In those moments, the burden of command revealed itself most clearly. For the Great Crusade was not driven by hatred. It was driven by necessity. Humanity, scattered and divided, could not endure indefinitely. Fragmentation had brought suffering beyond measure. The Imperium existed to end that suffering, to bind mankind together into a single, enduring whole. This belief guided every action, lending moral certainty to decisions that might otherwise have been unbearable. And so the fleets continued their advance. On countless worlds, the arrival of the Imperium marked the end of isolation. Long-separated colonies, their skies untouched by Terran vessels for generations, watched in silence as ships of impossible scale descended from orbit. Their inhabitants, shaped by environments both hostile and nurturing, faced a moment that would define their future. Some greeted the Imperium with relief, their leaders recognizing the strength and stability it offered. Others watched with suspicion, uncertain whether this new arrival represented salvation or domination. In many cases, words came before weapons. Envoys descended beneath banners of unity, bearing declarations that spoke of shared origin and shared destiny. They spoke of terror, of the Emperor, and of the promise of restored connection. They offered protection, knowledge, and a place within something greater than any single world could achieve alone. Often, this was enough. When acceptance was given freely, the transformation of a world began with quiet efficiency. Administrators established order. Engineers restored forgotten infrastructure. Astropaths carried news of compliance back across the void, their messages joining the endless flow of information that sustained the Imperium's cohesion. What had once been isolated became connected, its people woven into the fabric of a civilization that spanned the stars. But not all worlds accepted such transformation. There were those who had grown strong in their independence, whose rulers saw no need for external authority. Others had forgotten their origins entirely, their cultures diverging so completely that the Imperium appeared as something alien. In these moments, diplomacy gave way to demonstration. The Legiones Astartes descended. Their arrival was swift and absolute, their purpose unmistakable. They moved with discipline that reflected not only training, but creation itself. Every motion was deliberate. Every action served a greater design. They did not revel in destruction, nor did they hesitate before it. They existed to ensure that the Imperium's advance could not be halted by reluctance or fear. To those who witnessed them, they appeared as figures drawn from myth. Resistance, when it occurred, was brief. Yet even in conquest, there was restraint. The Imperium did not seek annihilation, but compliance. Its objective was not the destruction of humanity's scattered fragments, but their restoration. Worlds were not erased. They were remade, their futures redirected toward unity. Through it all, the Emperor remained distant. His physical absence did not weaken his authority. It deepened it. He existed not as a presence confined to a single place, but as a force that shaped the Imperium's every movement. His commands, transmitted across unimaginable distances, carried clarity that left no room for doubt. Those who received them did not question. They obeyed, for they believed. This belief was the foundation upon which the Great Crusade was built. It sustained the fleets through the long passages between stars. It steadied the hands of commanders faced with impossible choices. It gave meaning to sacrifices that would otherwise have seemed unbearable. There were, at times, moments of stillness. Moments when the advance paused, and fleets gathered at the edge of newly compliant systems. In these quiet intervals, the scale of the Imperium's growth became visible even to those who lived within it. Charts once marked by emptiness now bore the names of worlds returned to human unity. Routes that had been uncertain became reliable corridors of travel and communication. Humanity was no longer alone, and yet the galaxy remained vast beyond measure. For every system brought into compliance, countless others remained unexplored. The Imperium's progress, though immense, was only the beginning of something far greater. There were regions where ancient signals flickered at the edge of perception, hinting at civilizations long silent. There were shadows between the stars that no expedition had yet entered. The Primarchs understood this better than any. They stood at the forefront of a transformation whose full scope could not yet be seen. Their victories were not ends in themselves, but steps along an endless path. Each compliant world strengthened the Imperium. Each new fleet extended its reach. Each passing year carried humanity farther from the darkness of its past. Still, there remained a quiet awareness, seldom spoken but deeply felt. The Imperium's unity, though vast, was also fragile. It depended upon faith, upon loyalty, and upon the unbroken chain of command that carried the Emperor's will across the stars. So long as that chain endured, the Imperium would continue to grow. So long as belief remained unshaken, its future would remain secure. And so the fleets pressed onward, their course set by a vision older than any of them, moving in silence through the endless night, bearing with them the fragile, unyielding hope of a species determined never to be divided again. As the Imperium expanded across the widening gulf of the galaxy, the nature of its leadership began to change in ways subtle enough that few recognized them in the moment. The Emperor, who had once walked openly among his warriors during the earliest triumphs of the Crusade, became a more distant presence. His attention, drawn increasingly toward matters centered upon terror, no longer followed every fleet or witnessed every compliance firsthand. His physical absence did not diminish his authority, but it altered the shape of its expression, placing greater weight upon those chosen to act in his stead. Foremost among these figures was Horus. He stood at the apex of the Imperium's military hierarchy, bearing a title that carried both honor and burden in equal measure. As War Master, he was more than a commander. He was the Emperor's voice among the stars, the living extension of a will that no longer guided the crusade through personal presence. The appointment had been received with universal recognition, for none doubted his capability or his loyalty. He possessed a clarity of purpose that inspired confidence, and a strength that drew unwavering devotion from those who served beneath him. Yet the title carried with it a solitude that few could fully perceive. From a command deck of his flagship, Horus oversaw the movement of fleets whose numbers exceeded easy counting. Each carried its own responsibilities, its own struggles, its own quiet victories. Through endless streams of reports and astropathic transmissions, he remained connected to a war that stretched across distances too vast for any single mind to encompass. He read of worlds brought peacefully into compliance, their populations welcoming the Imperium's return. He read also of resistance, of struggles that demanded sacrifice and endurance. In all of this, he acted with certainty. He did not question the Emperor's vision. He did not hesitate before the responsibilities placed upon him. His loyalty was not born of obligation, but of belief. He understood, as few others could, the magnitude of what was being built. Humanity, once fragmented and vulnerable, was becoming unified beneath a single purpose. The Imperium was not merely an empire. It was a safeguard against the return of the darkness that had once nearly extinguished mankind. Still, there were moments when the distance between terror and the crusade felt greater than any physical separation. The Emperor's communications, though precise and unquestionable, were infrequent. They arrived as declarations rather than conversations, conveying instruction without explanation. There was no uncertainty in them, no hesitation. They reflected a mind focused upon objectives that extended beyond immediate concerns, beyond even the vast scope of the crusade itself. Horus accepted this without complaint. He had been created for this purpose. Yet he remembered the earlier days, when the Emperor had stood beside him, when decisions had been shared not through distant transmission, but through direct presence. In those moments, there had been no separation between vision and action. There had been unity not only of purpose, but of proximity. Now, that unity existed across silence. The burden of maintaining it fell upon Horus alone. Around him, the crusade continued its steady advance. Fleets departed and returned. Worlds were rediscovered and reclaimed. The machinery of expansion moved forward with relentless momentum, sustained by the efforts of countless individuals whose lives would never be recorded in history. To them, the War Master was a constant, a figure whose leadership provided continuity in the Emperor's absence. They did not see the weight he carried. They saw only certainty. Among the other Primarchs, his authority was acknowledged without challenge. Each commanded his own legion. Each pursued the Emperor's vision in his own manner, yet all recognized the War Master's role as a unifying force among them. His leadership ensured that the crusade did not fragment into separate endeavors, that its countless campaigns remained aligned toward a singular objective. This unity was essential. Without it, the Imperium's expansion would lose its cohesion. The scattered fleets would become isolated, their efforts disconnected. The Emperor's vision, so carefully constructed, would falter. And so Horus maintained that unity. He traveled between fleets, his presence reinforcing the bonds that held them together. He spoke with commanders, listened to their reports, and offered guidance shaped by his understanding of the Emperor's intent. He did not rule through fear, nor did he demand obedience through force. His authority was accepted because it was trusted. He was In every sense, the Emperor's chosen instrument. Yet even instruments, no matter how perfectly crafted, existed within the limits of their creation. Beyond the boundaries of explored space, the galaxy remained vast and unknowable. Each new system brought with it uncertainties that no amount of preparation could entirely eliminate. Strange signals echoed through the void. Silent worlds drifted in darkness, their histories erased by time. There were regions where the Imperium's presence remained tenuous, where its influence had not yet taken firm root. The Crusade moved toward these places without hesitation, for it could do nothing else. To stop would be to accept incompleteness. To accept incompleteness would be to accept vulnerability. The Imperium could not allow such weakness to exist within itself. And so the War Master watched over it all. He stood at the center of a vast and growing empire, bound by duty to a purpose greater than himself. The Emperor's vision guided him, even across the immeasurable distance that now separated them. Their connection endured, carried not through proximity, but through shared intent. In the quiet hours, as his flagship moved through the endless darkness between stars, Horus would observe the distant light of systems newly brought into compliance. Each one represented progress. Each one affirmed the righteousness of their cause. Yet the silence between those lights remained, a silence vast and patient, stretching across the void, waiting without urgency, as the Imperium advanced deeper into the unknown, and the War Master continued his vigil beneath the distant, unseen gaze of the one who had entrusted him with humanity's future. There came a time, as the Imperium's expansion pressed steadily outward, when the War Master's attention was drawn toward a system long overlooked by earlier expeditions. It lay at the fringe of charted space, distant from established routes, and surrounded by regions where navigation remained uncertain. Records of its existence were incomplete, preserved only in fragments carried forward from the earliest eras of human exploration. Its designation had survived, but little else. It was, in every meaningful sense, a forgotten place. Yet it endured. Astropathic signals, faint and intermittent, had been detected at irregular intervals. They bore patterns that suggested deliberate origin, but their meaning remained unclear. They did not match any known Imperial cipher, nor did they correspond to the degraded transmissions of worlds fallen into technological decline. They existed in isolation, repeating across the void with a persistence that implied purpose rather than accident. Such signals could not be ignored. The War Master ordered an expeditionary force to investigate, assigning to it vessels capable of both diplomacy and war. The fleet's passage took many months, its ships moving through regions where the light of distant stars offered little guidance. Navigators, relying upon ancient methods and instinct refined through long experience, guided their vessels along paths that had not been traveled for generations. At last, they arrived. The system revealed itself slowly, its central star dim but stable, surrounded by worlds that bore the quiet marks of natural formation. There were no visible defenses, no orbital platforms or weapon arrays to challenge the fleet's approach. Yet the signal persisted, originating from the fourth planet, a sphere of muted color and thin atmospheric cloud. It was a human world. Initial scans confirmed the presence of vast structures upon its surface, arranged in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Cities, though diminished by time, remained intact. Energy readings indicated ongoing activity, but at levels far below those of a fully industrialized civilization. There were no signs of planetary distress, no evidence of catastrophic collapse. The world had endured. As the fleet established orbit, the signal strengthened, its pattern clarifying as though in response to their arrival. It did not convey hostility. It conveyed awareness. For a time, the War Master observed in silence. He understood the significance of such discoveries. Each lost world represented a fragment of humanity's scattered past, and each carried within it the possibility of restoration. Yet caution was necessary. Isolation could shape civilizations in unpredictable ways, altering their beliefs and their understanding of their place in the galaxy. An envoy was prepared. It descended through the atmosphere with measured precision, its hull reflecting the pale light of the distant star. Below, the surface revealed vast plains broken by the remnants of ancient architecture. Towers, worn by centuries of wind and erosion, rose above silent cities. Roads extended outward in geometric patterns, connecting structures whose purpose could only be guessed. There was no immediate response to the envoy's arrival. Its landing site lay within a broad expanse of open ground, its surface marked by faint traces of former activity. The air was still. No movement disturbed the horizon. Yet the signal continued, steady and unbroken. The envoys waited. Hours passed. Then, at last, there came motion. Figures emerged from the distant structures, moving with deliberate calm. They bore no visible weapons. Their approach was neither hurried nor hesitant. They advanced as those who had long anticipated this moment, their posture conveying neither fear nor defiance. They had been waiting. Communication began through cautious exchange, aided by the Imperium's translators and analytical systems. The inhabitants' language, though altered by time, retained recognizable elements of ancient Terran origin. Through patient effort, meaning was established. They knew of Terra, not as a distant memory, but as a truth preserved across generations. Their ancestors, they explained, had arrived during humanity's first expansion into the stars. When the age of strife had severed their connection to the wider galaxy, they had endured in isolation, maintaining fragments of knowledge passed down through careful stewardship. They had watched the stars in silence, uncertain whether humanity beyond their world had survived. Yet they had never abandoned hope. The signal had been their vigil, a call sent endlessly into the void, awaiting an answer that might never come. Now, at last, it had been heard. The War Master listened to these reports with solemn attention. He understood the significance of what had been found. This was not a world that had fallen into ignorance. It was a world that had remembered. Its people had preserved their identity not through strength of arms, but through strength of belief. They accepted the Imperium's arrival without resistance. There was no need for demonstration of force, no need for compliance through conquest. Their unity had endured even in isolation, and in that unity, they recognized the Imperium's purpose. Preparations began at once to integrate the world into the expanding structure of human civilization. Administrators would follow. Engineers would restore connection to the wider network of Imperial infrastructure. Its people would take their place among the countless billions who now shared a common destiny. Yet as the fleet remained in orbit, there was a quiet awareness among its commanders. This world had waited in silence for centuries. It had endured not through certainty, but through faith in something unseen. And now, as its signal finally ceased, its purpose fulfilled, the Imperium carried that faith forward into the endless night, leaving behind a world no longer alone beneath the distant, watching stars. In the aftermath of the Silent World's compliance, the expeditionary fleet remained in orbit for a measured span of time, neither departing immediately nor lingering without purpose. Such moments of stillness were not uncommon during the Great Crusade, for integration required patience equal to conquest. A world, once isolated, could not be restored to the Imperium through declaration alone. It required careful alignment, its people and systems brought into harmony with structures that spanned distances beyond their former imagining. From the command deck of his flagship, the War Master observed the planet below. Its continents, marked by the slow erosion of centuries, bore the quiet evidence of endurance. There was no visible sign of celebration upon its surface, no vast gatherings or displays of triumph. Instead, there was calm continuation. Its people had awaited reconnectile not with urgency, but with certainty, and now that it had come, they accepted it with the same measured composure that had sustained them through isolation. This composure was noted. It spoke of stability. Imperial landers descended in steady procession, their arrival carrying the first wave of specialist tasks with restoring the world's connection to the greater Imperium. Among them were representatives of the Administratum, whose responsibility it was to establish the systems through which the planet would communicate and contribute. With them came adepts of the Mechanicum, their presence marked by the quiet reverence with which they approached the ancient infrastructure that lay dormant beneath the planet's surface. Much of that infrastructure had survived. Generators, though diminished in output, remained functional. Transit systems, preserved through careful maintenance, required only modest restoration. Data archives, stored within sealed vaults, contained records whose age reached back to humanity's earliest ventures beyond Terra. These remnants were treated not merely as tools, but as relics, physical links to an era when humanity had first claimed the stars. The Imperium did not erase such history. It incorporated it. Astropathic choirs established their presence soon after, their tasks both practical and symbolic. Through their efforts, the world's voice would join the endless chorus that bound the Imperium together. Messages, carried across distances no vessel could traverse in a single lifetime, would ensure that isolation would never return. The silence that had once defined this system will be replaced by connection, its existence acknowledged and sustained within the Imperium's vast awareness. Above it all, the fleet remained vigilant. Though the world had accepted compliance without resistance, caution remained necessary. The galaxy was not empty. There were forces beyond humanity's control, and vigilance was a shield against unforeseen threat. Patrol vessels maintained their positions, their sensors reaching outward into the void, ensuring that the fragile process of reintegration would not be interrupted. The War Master understood this balance well. Unity required strength, but it also required protection. He considered the report presented before him, each detailing a different aspect of the world's restoration. There was efficiency in these efforts, born of experience repeated across countless systems. Yet each world remained distinct, shaped by its own history and its own endurance. This one, in particular, carried a significance that extended beyond its material value. It had remembered. That memory, preserved through centuries of silence, affirmed the Imperium's purpose. Humanity, even when scattered, had not entirely forgotten itself. The Emperor's vision had endured not only through conquest, but through the quiet persistence of those who had never abandoned it. Such endurance strengthened the Imperium as surely as any victory. Elsewhere in the fleet, the Legiones Astartes prepared for departure. Their presence upon the surface had been brief, their purpose fulfilled without the need for battle. They had stood as symbols rather than instruments of destruction, their silent watch reinforcing the certainty of imperial authority. Now, they returned to their vessels, ready to continue the Crusade's advance. For them, there was no final destination, only continuation. The machinery of expansion allowed little time for reflection, yet reflection remained inevitable. In the quiet corridors of vast warships, in the moment between command decisions and astropathic transmissions, there existed brief intervals in which the enormity of their undertaking could be felt. The Imperium was not merely expanding. It was reshaping the destiny of an entire species. This knowledge carried weight, not as a burden, but as a constant presence. The War Master bore that presence without visible strain. His role required certainty, and certainty was what he provided. Those who served beneath him saw in him the embodiment of the Emperor's will, a figure whose leadership ensured that the Crusade would not falter. His confidence sustained theirs, reinforcing the unity upon which the Imperium depended. Yet even unity required renewal. Each compliant world contributed to the Imperium's strength, not only through resources or strategic position, but through affirmation of its purpose. The Imperium did not exist solely to conquer. It existed to reunite. Every world restored was a fragment made whole, a voice returned to the greater chorus. Below, the silent world had begun its transformation. Signals now flowed steadily between surface and orbit, their patterns precise and continuous. Where once there had been only a solitary call cast into the void, there was now conversation. The world was no longer alone. Its existence had been acknowledged, its place secured. In time, the fleet would depart. Its vessels would turn once more toward unexplored regions, carrying with them the unending momentum of the Crusade. The world would remain behind, its future no longer defined by isolation, but by participation in something vast and enduring. For the Imperium, there could be no pause. There were always more stars awaiting rediscovery. And so, in the quiet darkness above a world that had waited for centuries, the fleet prepared itself to move on, its purpose unchanged, its course set toward horizons that remain unseen, as humanity's great unification continued beneath the distant and watchful light of eternity. When the fleet at last departed the restored world, its passage was marked not by ceremony, but by quiet inevitability. Vast engines awakened with controlled power, their steady output guiding the immense vessels away from orbit and back into the open darkness. Below, the planet diminished slowly, its surface fading into the distance until it became indistinguishable from the countless other spheres scattered across the galaxy. Its long isolation had ended, and now it would endure as part of something greater, its vigil transformed into participation. Ahead lay regions untouched by Imperial presence. The War Master observed the shifting displays before him, each representing routes plotted through uncertain territory. These paths were not fixed. They were living projections, shaped by fragments of recovered knowledge and the cautious predictions of navigators whose perception extended beyond ordinary sight. The void was not uniform. It possessed currents unseen, patterns that influenced movement and demanded careful interpretation. To cross it required trust. Trust in those who guided the fleet. Trust in the Emperor's design. Trust in the belief that humanity's destiny lay not behind, but ahead. Within the fleet, activity resumed its familiar rhythm. Messages were transmitted and received. Orders were given and acknowledged. The immense complexity of the crusade continued without interruption, its momentum sustained by countless individuals whose roles, though small in isolation, formed the foundation of the Imperium's strength. Yet beneath this steady continuation, there existed subtle occurrence. The reintegration of the silent world had reinforced the Imperium's certainty, but it had also served as a reminder of the vastness that remained unconquered. For every world that welcomed compliance, there were others whose nature could not be predicted. Isolation shaped not only endurance, but change. Across centuries, humanity had adapted in ways that could not always be anticipated. Some changes strengthened unity, others did not. The War Master understood this without needing to speak it. His responsibility was not merely to oversee expansion, but to ensure that expansion remained aligned with the Emperor's purpose. The Imperium was more than territory. It was an idea, one that required constant preservation. He moved through the silent chambers of his flagship, its immense corridors illuminated by steady, unwavering light. Around him, crew members performed their duties with disciplined focus. They did not pause as he passed. They did not speak unless required. Their loyalty was expressed through action, through the precise execution of responsibilities that sustained the fleet's existence. Each of them was part of something immeasurably larger than themselves. Beyond the hull, the void remained unchanged. Stars burned with distant indifference, their light traveling across unimaginable distances to reach the fleet's sensors. Some marked systems already claimed. Others marked destinations yet to be reached. Between them stretched expanses where nothing stirred, where silence reigned unbroken. It was within this silence that the Imperium advanced. Reports arrived from distant expeditionary groups, their transmissions carried across the fragile pathways of extrapathic communication. Some spoke of successful compliance, of worlds restored and integrated. Others described resistance, brief but resolute, resolved through the application of force. Each report added to the growing record of humanity's reunification, each confirming that the Crusade's progress remained unbroken. Still, there were absences. Signals that had once been present fell silent. Regions once thought stable became uncertain. These occurrences were rare, and explanations were often found in the natural hazards of interstellar existence. Yet their presence, however infrequent, served as reminders that the galaxy was not fully known. The War Master regarded such reports with careful attention. He did not allow uncertainty to disrupt the Crusade's momentum. To hesitate would be to invite fragmentation. To fragment would be to weaken. The Imperium's strength lay in its continuity, in its refusal to yield to doubt. And so the fleet continued forward. Time, measured in the steady progression of the fleet's journey, passed without interruption. Days and weeks blended into one another, their passage marked only by the completion of tasks and the gradual shift of distant stars. Within this continuity, the Imperium's purpose remained constant, unaltered by the vastness through which it moved. Yet even constant motion could not fully conceal the deeper truth of their undertaking. The Imperium was not merely reclaiming lost worlds. It was reshaping the future of humanity itself. Every decision carried consequences that would extend far beyond the present moment. Every world brought into compliance became part of a structure that would endure long after those who built it had passed into memory. This awareness did not weaken resolve. It strengthened it. For those who served the Crusade believed in its necessity. They believed that unity was the only path by which humanity could endure. They believed that the Emperor's vision, though vast and often distant, represented the culmination of countless generations of struggle. Their belief carried them forward. At the edge of the fleet's sensor range, a new system awaited, its star burning with quiet stability. It had not yet been named within Imperial records. It existed only as coordinates, a destination among countless others. Soon, it too would be observed, evaluated, and, if necessary, brought into compliance. The process would repeat, as it had so many times before. Yet each repetition carried its own significance. Each world was unique. Each encounter added to the Imperium's understanding of itself. As the fleet altered its course, its immense structure shifting with deliberate precision, the War Master remained at his station. Before him, The displays reflected the path ahead, their steady light illuminating the continuation of humanity's advance. Behind him lay worlds reclaimed from silence. Ahead lay worlds still waiting. And between them, carried upon vessels of steel and faith, moved the Imperium itself, guided by unseen currents through the endless night, its purpose unbroken as it journeyed ever deeper into the unknown. The fleet approached the unnamed system with the same measured discipline that had defined every prior advance. There was no urgency in its movement, no outward sign of anticipation. The vessels altered their formation with deliberate precision, their vast hulls turning in silent coordination as they emerged from the immaterial depths into the cold clarity of real space. Before them, the system revealed itself in gradual detail, its solitary star casting pale illumination across a scattering of distant worlds. At first observation, there was nothing remarkable in its appearance. The primary star burned with stable intensity, neither young nor nearing its end. Its planets followed predictable orbits, their motions unbroken by visible disruption. There were no artificial structures immediately apparent, no orbital constructs to suggest habitation or defense. It was, in outward form, a system like countless others. Yet absence itself could be significant. The War Master regarded the incoming data without expression. His presence upon the command deck was still, his attention fixed upon the slow accumulation of information. Around him, officers and adept performed their duties in silence, their focus directed toward interpreting the system's quiet signals. Sensor arrays extended their reach, probing the planets and the space between them with patient persistence. One world, third in orbit from the star, drew particular notice. Its atmosphere was dense and stable, its surface temperature within the narrow range that permitted human habitation. Oceans covered much of its surface, broken by continents whose shape suggested geological stability across vast stretches of time. There were structures present, faint, indistinct patterns that did not conform to natural formation. The world bore the marks of civilization, yet there were no transmissions. No signals rose from its surface to greet the fleet's arrival. No automated defenses activated in response to intrusion. The planet remained silent, its stillness uninterrupted. This silence was not unfamiliar, but it demanded understanding. The War Master issued no immediate command. Instead, he allowed the process of observation to continue. Additional scans were conducted, their resolution increasing with each measure pass. The results confirmed the presence of constructed forms, their distribution indicating cities of considerable scale. Power readings were detected, but they were inconsistent, fluctuating in ways that suggested irregular activity rather than sustained function. The world lived, but quietly. Within the fleet, preparations began in accordance with established protocol. Reconnaissance vessels were readied, their smaller profiles allowing closer examination without committing the full strength of the expedition. These craft moved with cautious intent, descending through the planet's atmosphere to gather direct observation. From orbit, the War Master watched their progress. He had witnessed this process many times. Each world carried its own history, its own path through the long isolation imposed by the Age of Strife. Some greeted the Imperium with open acceptance. Others required persuasion. A few demanded force. This world had not yet revealed its nature. The reconnaissance craft transmitted their findings as they descended. Atmospheric composition was confirmed to be compatible with human life. Environmental conditions, though variable, presented no immediate hazard. The structures observed from orbit resolved into greater clarity, revealing architecture whose design bore distant resemblance to ancient Terran forms. There was movement. Small figures traversed the surface, their patterns of activity consistent with organized habitation. They did not scatter or conceal themselves in response to the craft's presence, nor did they approach. They continued their routines without visible acknowledgement, as though the arrival above them had not yet altered their understanding of the world. This, too, was noted. The absence of reaction suggested either ignorance or restraint. Neither possibility could be assumed without confirmation. The War Master considered the reports in silence. His duty required clarity, yet clarity did not always arrive at once. It emerged through careful observation, through patience and measured response. The Imperium did not advance through impulse. It advanced through certainty. He authorized the next step. An envoy would descend. Its purpose would be simple: establish communication, determine the world's disposition, and extend the Imperium's offer of unity. Such actions have been repeated across uncounted systems, forming the foundation of humanity's restoration. Each successful contact reinforced the Imperium's continuity. Each compliant world strengthened its future. The envoy vessel detached from the fleet with controlled precision, its descent steady and unhurried. Within its hull traveled representatives trained not for war, but for understanding. They carried with them the authority of the Imperium, expressed not through weapons, but through presence. As it entered the atmosphere, the fleet remained above, its vast structure unmoving. From the command deck, the War Master observed the descent in silence. He did not interfere. He did not hasten its progress. Such moments required stillness. Below, the world awaited. Its surface, shaped by centuries unseen, bore witness of the passage of time without external influence. Its people, whoever they were, had endured without knowledge of the Imperium's return. Now, that return had come. Whether they would accept it remained unknown. The envoy's signal continued, steady and uninterrupted, marking its progress toward the surface. Around it, the planet's clouds drifted in slow formation, their motion indifferent to the presence passing among them. Above, the fleet maintained its vigil. It did not threaten. It did not withdraw. It waited. For in the Great Crusade, patience was as vital as strength, and certainty, when it came, was allowed to emerge in its own time, beneath the distant and unchanging light of the stars. The envoy vessel descended through the layered clouds with unbroken calm, its passage marked only by the faint displacement of vapor that closed again in its wake. Its hull, fashioned to endure the stresses of void and atmosphere alike, carried within it the quiet authority of the Imperium. There was no urgency in its descent, no sign of force imposed or threatened. It moved with the certainty of purpose that defined all things born of the Great Crusade. Below, the surface revealed itself with increasing clarity. Vast plains stretched between cities whose outlines bore the weight of long habitation. Their structures, though weathered by time, remained intact, rising in ordered arrangements that reflected planning rather than chance. There was continuity in their design, a sense that the civilization below had not collapsed, but endured, yet its endurance had not been accompanied by expansion. The cities showed no outward sign of growth beyond their established limits. They had remained as they were. The envoy's instruments recorded movement along the surface. Individuals moved within the open spaces between structures, their patterns steady and deliberate. There was no visible panic, no sign that the vessel's arrival had disrupted their routines. They neither fled nor gathered. They simply continued. This absence of reaction carried meaning. It suggested awareness without alarm. The vessel selected its landing site within a broad expanse near one of the larger urban centers. The ground below was level and unobstructed, its surface bearing faint marks that indicated long use. As the vessel completed its descent, its landing struts met the surface with gentle finality. For a moment, there was stillness. Then, the hatch opened. The envoys emerged without haste. They stood beneath an unfamiliar sky, their presence marked by the symbols they bore rather than any display of force. Their armor and robes reflected the Imperium's authority, their forms unmistakable against the quiet landscape. They did not advance immediately. They waited. Across the open distance, figures began to approach. They moved in small numbers, their pace measured. There was no sign of weaponry among them, no posture of aggression. Their attention remained fixed upon the envoys, their expressions unreadable at such distance. They did not hurry. They did not hesitate. They came forward as those fulfilling an expectation. Communication began without spoken sound. The envoys activated their transmission systems, broadcasting patterns designed to establish basic linguistic alignment. These signals, refined through centuries of first contact, carried mathematical and symbolic structures intended to form a foundation for mutual understanding. For a time, there was no response. Then, from the city beyond, a signal returned. It emerged not from a visible transmitter, but from the structures themselves, carried through systems whose existence had not been immediately apparent. The signal bore structure. It bore intent. It bore recognition. The envoys received it in silence, their instruments translating its patterns into meaning. The process was gradual, each exchange building upon the last. The inhabitants possessed language derived from ancient Terran roots, altered by time yet unmistakable in origin. Their words, once rendered into imperial form, carried clarity. They had known this moment would come. Their records, preserved across generations, spoke of a greater humanity beyond their world. They had maintained these records not as myth, but as truth. They had not known when contact would return, but they had believed that it would. The Imperium's arrival was not a surprise. It was a fulfillment. The envoys conveyed the Imperium's purpose as it had been conveyed across countless worlds before. They spoke of unity, of restoration, of the Emperor whose vision encompassed all humanity. They spoke of a future in which isolation would no longer define the fate of this world. The inhabitants listened. Their response was neither immediate nor resistant. It carried contemplation, a measured acknowledgement of what was being offered. They did not question the Imperium's existence. They did not deny their shared origin. They accepted its truth. Above, in orbit, the War Master received the envoy's transmissions as they were relayed upward. He listened without interruption, his attention fixed upon the unfolding exchange. There was no expression upon his face, no visible reaction. Yet the significance of the moment was understood. Another world stood upon the threshold of unity. The decision, when it came, was conveyed with calm certainty. The inhabitants acknowledged the Imperium's authority. They recognized the Emperor as a sovereign of humanity. They accepted integration into the structure that now extended across the stars. There was no resistance, no conflict, only acceptance. The envoy vessel remained upon the surface as the first stage of compliance began. Additional landers would follow, carrying the administrators and specialists required to establish lasting connection. The process, though vast in consequence, would unfold with quiet precision. Above, the fleet held its position. Its purpose, in this moment, was not conquest. It was witness. The War Master regarded the world below as its voice joined the Imperium's greater chorus. Its long silence had ended, replaced by connection that would not fade. It had endured alone, sustained by memory and belief. Now, it would endure as part of something beyond itself. The stars around it remained unchanged, their distant light indifferent to the transformation unfolding beneath them. Yet within that transformation, humanity moved one step closer to unity, its forgotten fragments drawn once more into the embrace of a destiny that had never truly released them, as the Imperium's presence settled upon the world with the quiet permanence of returning dawn. In the days that followed the world's acceptance, the Imperium's presence upon its surface deepened with quiet efficiency. What had begun as a single envoy became a steady procession of arrivals, each vessel carrying individuals whose purpose was not conquest, but continuity. They descended through the atmosphere in measured intervals, their engines disturbing the sky only briefly before silence returned. The world received them without resistance. Its cities, long accustomed to isolation, did not resist a gradual integration of foreign authority. Instead, they adapted with calm deliberation, their inhabitants observing the newcomers with composed attention. There was curiosity, but no unrest. The Imperium did not impose sudden transformation. It allowed change to unfold in alignment with stability, ensuring that unity did not become disruption. Structures were established first. Communication relays rose near existing population centers, their design reflecting the Imperium's functional clarity. These installations served as the world's first permanent link to the greater network beyond its skies. Through them, messages passed outward, joining the constant exchange that bound distant systems together. What had once been a silent world became a participant in the Imperium's endless dialogue. Astropaths arrived soon after. They were received with solemn recognition, for their presence represented something greater than mere technology. Through their minds, the Imperium's reach extended across distances that no physical vessel could cross with equal speed. Their voices carried thought itself, bridging the emptiness between stars. Within newly prepared chambers, they began their wake, their concentration forming pathways of communication that ensured the world would never again be alone. The War Master observed these developments from orbit. He did not descend. His role was not to oversee the details of integration, but to ensure its certainty. From the command deck of his flagship, he reviewed reports that arrived in steady sequence. Each confirmed that compliance proceeded without complication. Each reinforced the Imperium's unbroken advance. Yet his attention extended beyond the immediate. He understood that loyalty, once given, required preservation. Unity was not sustained by declaration alone. It endured through continuity, through the careful reinforcement of belief and purpose. The Imperium did not merely claim worlds. It shaped their future, ensuring that their place within humanity's greater structure remained secure. Below, the inhabitants continued their lives. They did not abandon their cities. They did not withdraw from their routines. Instead, they incorporated the Imperium's presence into the patterns they had long maintained. Their acceptance was not marked by visible celebration. It was marked by quiet acknowledgement, by the absence of resistance. This quiet acceptance held meaning. It reflected trust. The Legiones Astartes remained present, though their numbers upon the surface were limited. Their purpose was not to govern, but to stand as symbols of the Imperium's strength. Their armored forms, unmistakable in their design, moved rarely among the population. When they did, their presence inspired observation rather than fear. They represented certainty. To the inhabitants, they were figures drawn from the distant past made manifest. Their existence confirmed that the Imperium was not merely an idea, but a reality carried by living forms. They did not speak often. They did not need to. Their presence was enough. Within the fleet, preparations for departure had begun. Supplies were accounted for. Routes were recalculated. The machinery of the Crusade, having fulfilled its purpose here, readied itself to move onward. This process was neither hurried nor delayed. It followed the same careful progression that defined all imperial movement. The War Master remained at his station. He considered the world below, its surface now marked by the first permanent signs of imperial integration. Its long isolation had ended, replaced by connection that would extend beyond the lifetime of any individual now living. Its people had accepted their place within humanity's greater destiny. Such acceptance strengthened the Imperium, yet it also carried responsibility. For every world brought into compliance became part of a structure that demanded preservation. The Imperium's unity, though vast, was not unchanging. It required vigilance. It required continuity of purpose. It required the unwavering loyalty of those who served it. The War Master understood this fully. His role extended beyond conquest. He was guardian of unity, bearer of authority entrusted to him by the Emperor himself. Through his actions, the Imperium's continuity was ensured. Through his vigilance, its future remained secure. Beyond the fleet, the stars extended into immeasurable distance. Each point of light represented possibility. Each system awaited discovery, judgment, and, if necessary, compliance. The Crusade's work was far from complete. Its momentum could not be halted. To do so would be to abandon the purpose for which it existed. And so, the fleet prepared to depart. Its engines would soon awaken once more, carrying it toward destinations not yet seen. The world below would remain, its place within the Imperium secured. It would continue, its loyalty sustained by the structures now established. In time, its voice would become indistinguishable from the countless others that formed the Imperium's endless chorus. And above it, for a final measured span, the fleet held its silent vigil, poised between what had been achieved and what still awaited, as humanity's great unification continued its steady passage through the darkness beyond. The fleet did not depart at once. Though preparations had been completed and routes established, there remained a measured pause before movement resumed. Such pauses were not born of hesitation, but of discipline. The Imperium did not abandon its newly compliant worlds without certainty that stability had taken root. Vigilance, even in success, remained essential. From the command deck of his flagship, the War Master stood in silent observation. Before him, the world turned with slow inevitability, its surface illuminated by the distant star it had orbited for uncounted ages. Now, for the first time in centuries, it turned beneath the watchful presence of the wider Imperium. Its isolation had ended, replaced by connection that would extend far beyond the awareness of those living upon its surface. This moment, though quiet, held significance. It marked not an ending, but a transition. Reports continued to arrive, their content precise and unembellished. Integration proceeded without disruption. Communication relays functioned within acceptable parameters. The first astropathic transmissions had been successfully relayed beyond the system, their signals joining the vast and continuous exchange that bound humanity together. The world had spoken, and it had been heard. The War Master acknowledged these confirmations without outward reaction. Such outcomes were expected. Yet expectation did not diminish their importance. Every world brought into compliance reinforced the Imperium's unity. Every successful integration strengthened the foundation upon which humanity's future rested. The Great Crusade was not merely an expansion of territory. It was a restoration of a species long divided against itself. This restoration required constancy. Within the fleet, the Legiones Astartes prepared themselves for departure. Their armored forms moved through the immense corridors of their vessels with quiet purpose. They did not celebrate victory. They did not reflect upon accomplishment. Their existence was defined by continuation. There would always be another world awaiting compliance. There would always be another horizon beyond the present one. They accepted this without question. For them, purpose was absolute. Elsewhere, the fleet's human crews performed their duties with equal precision. Navigators entered their sealed chambers, their mind preparing to guide the fleet once more through the uncertain pathways beyond real space. Astropaths concluded their final transmissions, ensuring that no message remained undelivered. Officers reviewed tactical projections, their calculations extending beyond the immediate system into regions yet unexplored. All movement aligned toward departure. Yet still, the War Master waited. His authority extended across distances no ordinary commander could encompass. Through him, the Emperors will found expression. Through him, the Imperium's expansion remained unified. This responsibility was not one that could be set aside. It was constant, unending. He regarded the stars beyond the viewing ports. They shone with distant indifference, their light unchanged by the events unfolding among them. Each represented both destination and uncertainty. The Imperium's advance, though vast, had not yet reached its conclusion. There remained countless systems where humanity's presence had yet to be restored. He understood that his role within this process was both privilege and burden. The Emperor had entrusted him with command not merely because of strength, but because of certainty. That certainty sustained the crusade. It ensured that its purpose would not fragment or falter. In his actions, the Imperium found continuity. Yet continuity required more than action. It required endurance. Across the fleet, final confirmations were received. All vessels reported readiness. Supply levels were sufficient. Navigational pathways had been verified. The moment of departure had arrived. The War Master gave the command. It was delivered without emphasis, its authority inherent rather than expressed. Throughout the fleet, the order was received and acknowledged. Vast engines, dormant until now, awakened with control power. Their activation was not sudden, but gradual, their immense energy released with careful precision. The fleet began to move. Its vessels shifted in coordinated formation, their immense structures turning toward the open void beyond the system. The compliant world, once the sole focus of their presence, began to recede behind them. Its surface grew smaller with distance, its details fading into indistinct form. It remained behind, secure in its place within the Imperium. Ahead lay only darkness and distant light. The transition from stillness to motion was seamless. There was no moment of disruption, no sense of departure as loss. Movement was the Imperium's natural state. It did not linger. It did not remain where its purpose had been fulfilled. It advanced. Within the War Master's flagship, the command deck remained silent. Officers observed their instruments, their attention fixed upon the progression of the fleet's movement. No words were spoken beyond those required for function. The enormity of their undertaking did not require acknowledgement. It required only continuation. Beyond the fleet's hulls, the void stretched without limit. Somewhere within that vastness lay worlds awaiting rediscovery. Worlds that had endured alone. Worlds that had forgotten. Worlds that remembered. Each would face the same moment of decision. Each would become part of the Imperium, or be brought into it through necessity. This was the nature of the crusade. It did not judge with emotion. It did not act with hesitation. It fulfilled its purpose with unwavering certainty. The War Master remained at his station as the fleet reached the outer boundary of the system. Behind him lay another world reclaimed from isolation. Ahead lay the unknown, vast and unending. He did not look back. His gaze remained fixed upon the path before them, upon the distant stars that marked humanity's unfinished destiny, as the Imperium moved forward beneath his command, carrying its unity deeper into the silent and eternal night. The fleet continued its steady passage through the void, a formation of immense vessels moving with deliberate precision across a dark canvas illuminated only by distant points of light. Each ship carried its own contingent of life, its own purpose, yet all were bound by a singular mission, to bring the scattered remnants of humanity under one authority. The Great Crusade did not pause for reflection. It advanced relentlessly, guided by the certainty of command and the unyielding vision of the Emperor. For the War Master, the journey was both routine and profound. He stood upon the command deck, his eyes observing the shifting displays, noting the trajectories of distant stars and the subtle fluctuations in sensor readings. Each system ahead represented not only opportunity but uncertainty. The galaxy, though increasingly mapped and known, remained vast and unknowable. Every unexplored world could present compliance or resistance. Each encounter was a test of preparation and judgment. Reports arrived steadily from distant reconnaissance vessels. They described systems in which human presence had survived the age of strife, sometimes flourishing, sometimes diminished. Some worlds had preserved knowledge through careful stewardship. Others had reverted to rudimentary survival, their histories fragmented and incomplete. Yet all was significant. Every fragment of humanity, no matter how isolated or diminished, carried potential. The Imperium did not overlook potential. It claimed it, nurtured it, and incorporated it into the broader design. The War Master considered the implications of such discoveries. Unity was not merely a matter of conquest. It was a measure of understanding, coordination, and restraint. The Imperium's strength derived not only from the Legiones Astartes or its fleets, but from the careful alignment of countless systems and populations into a cohesive whole. Discord in even a single system could reverberate outward, disrupting communication, supply, and the confidence of adjacent worlds. Compliance required attention, and attention required judgment. IT was in such moments that the weight of command became tangible. The fleet entered a system at the edge of imperial charts, a cluster of planets whose presence had been recorded only through fragmented exploration. Scans revealed signs of habitation on the second planet, yet its inhabitants had shown no attempt to reach beyond their surface. Their signals, faint and irregular, suggested awareness but not ambition. The War Master understood that isolation could shape civilizations in unpredictable ways. Patience, precision, and vigilance were required before any contact could be attempted. A single misstep could ignite misunderstanding, resistance, or conflict. He authorized a slow deployment of reconnaissance. Smaller vessels, their instruments finely tuned to detect life and artificial structures, approached the planet. Data streamed back to the flagship, revealing cities built with order and foresight, though diminished in scale. Power usage was sporadic, suggesting an ongoing society maintaining itself with resources sufficient for survival but insufficient for expansion. It was a civilization capable of resilience, yet untested by contact with a wider galaxy. This was precisely why the Imperium's presence mattered. The War Master's envoys were prepared for descent. They carried no weapons beyond those required for personal protection, for force was to be the last resort. Their primary purpose was observation and measured engagement. Each envoy had been trained in patience, interpretation, and the recognition that compliance was achieved most efficiently through understanding rather than intimidation. The vessel descended through the planet's atmosphere, its passage smooth and unobtrusive. Below, the surface revealed itself gradually. Plains broken by hills, cities arranged in geometric clarity, and the subtle motion of life that suggested both diligence and routine. The inhabitants observed the descent with caution. Their signals, faint but consistent, indicated acknowledgment of the approaching presence. They did not flee, nor did they approach. They maintained equilibrium, an instinctive balance honed by centuries of isolation. The first communication attempts were met with silence. The War Master understood that silence was a form of response. It was measured, deliberate, and reflective. For civilizations unaccustomed to contact with the Imperium, abrupt intrusion could provoke fear or aggression. It was necessary to establish dialogue gradually, allowing understanding to form before any formal engagement. The envoy's astropathic transmissions repeated carefully, encoding meaning with clarity and structure. After hours of observation, signals returned. They were simple at first, fragments of recognition and inquiry, yet sufficient to establish a foundation. Through patient iteration, language formed, patterns were recognized, and meaning was confirmed. The inhabitants spoke not of opposition but of awareness. They had long understood that humanity beyond their world existed, yet they had endured in isolation, uncertain whether they would ever be reunited. Now, at last, they were heard. The War Master received reports from the envoys with measured attention. Their progress was steady, disciplined, and without incident. No resistance had been encountered. Compliance was emerging not through fear, but through recognition and shared history. This was the Imperium's ideal, a world integrated willingly, its unity confirmed through trust rather than coercion. In the command deck, the War Master allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The Great Crusade success was not only measured by territory reclaim, but by the endurance of its principles. Humanity's scattered remnants were being brought together, yet each integration carried lessons. Patience, vigilance, and careful observation were as essential as strength and fleet capacity. The balance between authority and understanding defined the Imperium's continuing expansion. Finally, the envoy's communications confirmed formal acceptance. The inhabitants acknowledged the Imperium, recognized the Emperor's authority, and consented to integration. Their world will become part of the growing network that bound humanity together, their isolation replaced by connection. The fleet maintained orbit as the first steps of administration and infrastructure deployment began. Power grids were aligned, communication relays activated, and astropathic nodes established. The civilization's resilience and careful stewardship ensured the process proceeded with minimal disruption. In time, its participation would be complete. The War Master stood in silence, observing the distant planet beneath the light of its star. Its long isolation had ended. Its compliance had been known, yet achieved without conflict. Another fragment of humanity, once alone, now endured within the greater Imperium, and beyond it, the endless void awaited. Stars stretched into the unknown, each a potential site of discovery, a challenge, or an opportunity. The crusade would continue. Its purpose remained unbroken. Its momentum could not be halted. In the quiet of the command deck, the War Master acknowledged the weight of his role, to guide, to observe, to ensure unity, and to carry forward a vision entrusted to him. Ahead lay uncertainty, yet it was a certainty of purpose, patience, and vigilance that allowed the Imperium to advance, as humanity's great unification continued beneath the ever-watchful light of the distant stars. The fleet moved with deliberate grace through the vast emptiness between stars, a silent host carrying the weight of humanity's destiny. Every vessel maintained its assigned position, engines humming in measured harmony as though the motion itself were a living rhythm. Above, distant suns shone without awareness, their light falling upon the immense forms of warships and transports alike, indifferent to the burdens carried beneath their illumination. For the War Master, command was not a matter of movement alone. Each decision, each measured pause, carried consequence. The Imperium's expansion relied upon certainty, yet certainty existed only through knowledge. Every system traversed, every world contacted, presented variables that demanded careful observation. The galaxy was vast, and even in the era of the Great Crusade, there remained spaces where understanding was incomplete. Reports continued to arrive from the vanguard. Some described worlds newly contacted, their inhabitants cautious but orderly. Others detailed remnants of civilizations that had survived centuries of isolation, their history preserved in fragments of records, oral traditions, or architectural memory. The pattern was familiar, a cycle of rediscovery, verification, and integration. Yet no two worlds were identical. Each required unique attention, and the weight of discernment rested upon those charged with oversight. The War Master understood this burden without acknowledgement. It was not one borne aloud. It was carried in silence, in measured attention, in the careful calibration of judgment and action. The Imperium's authority demanded that silence be observed and respected, that understanding precede decision. A misjudged approach could provoke resistance. An overlooked signal could result in unforeseen loss. Each success reinforced the crusade. Each era had the potential to echo across centuries. In a system at the edge of imperial knowledge, sensors detected faint transmissions from the third planet. They were irregular, fragmented, and difficult to interpret. Yet they persisted. The world's surface, though distant and partially obscured by cloud cover, revealed patterns of civilization. Cities appeared as geometric formations, though diminished in scale, evidence of careful organization and long endurance. Power readings suggested intermittent activity, functionally yet constrained, a civilization surviving but not expanding. The War Master ordered cautious observation. Reconnaissance craft descended into the atmosphere, their movement slow and unobtrusive. Instruments recorded environmental conditions, analyzed surface activity, and sought traces of infrastructure that might support human life. The vessels moved carefully, ensuring that their presence did not disturb the delicate equilibrium below. Isolation shaped behavior, and any sudden intrusion could alter perception, creating uncertainty or mistrust. Hours passed without immediate response. The inhabitants of the world observed the descending craft with measured curiosity. There was neither flight nor aggression, only the continuation of routine. Their signals, faint and sporadic, indicated recognition of the approaching presence. They had not anticipated this moment for generations, yet they had prepared themselves for its eventuality. It was the first test of resolve. The envoy vessels, carrying representatives trained in patient engagement, established initial communication. Messages were encoded to convey intent clearly, using a combination of symbolic, numerical, and linguistic patterns refined through centuries of contact experience. For a time, the world remained silent, a deliberate observation that reflected caution rather than hesitation. The envoys did not press. They allowed the silence to persist, recognizing its value in establishing mutual understanding. Slowly, signals returned. They were fragmented at first, simple acknowledgments of presence and comprehension. Over time, these fragments coalesced into coherent language, a bridge between isolation and connection. The inhabitants spoke not of conflict, but of acknowledgement, a recognition that their world was now seen, heard, and understood. The Imperium's authority was not demanded, it was recognized. From orbit, the War Master monitored the progress. His expression remained unchanged, yet his awareness extended to every transmission, every data point, and every subtle shift in the inhabitants' response. Integration was not an act of speed, it was an exercise of endurance and attention. Unity, once achieved, depended upon careful alignment, observation, and reinforcement. Preparations began to establish infrastructure. Communication relays were positioned to connect the world to the wider network. Astropathic nodes were activated to ensure the flow of thought across the void. Administrators and specialists prepared to guide the civilization's transition from isolation into participation within the Imperium. Every measure was taken to preserve continuity, prevent disruption, and secure long-term stability. The Legiones Astartes maintained their presence, silent and imposing. Their armored forms patrolled the immediate perimeter of the landing zones, yet they did not interfere with the inhabitants' routines. They represented authority without imposition, a visual confirmation of imperial oversight and reassurance of security. Their presence reinforced the sense that the Imperium's engagement was deliberate, measured, and enduring. In the command deck, the War Master reflected upon the weight of these operations. Each world reclaimed from isolation was a success, yet each carried the latent responsibility of vigilance. Compliance was not permanent without continued attention. Loyalty required nurture. Unity required patience. The Great Crusade demanded that even those who acted with unquestioned authority remain observant, measured, and deliberate. The fleet remained in orbit for the necessary interval, observing the integration process as the first stages of compliance took effect. The planet's voice, once a faint signal carried across empty space, now joined the Imperium's growing chorus. Its silence had ended, replaced by communication that would endure beyond the span of a single generation. And yet, the galaxy remained vast and unpredictable. Beyond the system, uncharted worlds awaited discovery, each a potential challenge or opportunity. The Crusade momentum was unbroken, yet it existed within a framework of continuous vigilance. Success was not measured solely by conquest, but by the careful balance of authority, patience, and understanding. As the War Master stood in quiet observation, the fleet prepared itself for eventual departure. The world below, having endured isolation for countless centuries, had faced its first test of connection and emerged intact. Its compliance had been achieved without conflict, yet the process had reaffirmed the principle that even in silence, vigilance and discipline were essential. And as the stars extended into the infinite distance, the Imperium continued its steady advance, carrying humanity's unity ever forward, guided by the certainty of command and the enduring vision that had initiated the Great Crusade. The fleet lingered at the edge of the system, its immense hulls casting slow shadows across the distant planets below. Engines remained in low-power standby, their hum a constant reminder of potential motion. Above the third planet, the world whose silence had endured centuries, the Imperium's presence settled like a gentle weight, observable but not oppressive. The War Master understood that patience was as essential to the Great Crusade as strength itself. Below, the world moved in quiet accommodation. Its inhabitants did not rush to embrace the new authority, nor did they resist it. Their observation of the envoys, the infrastructure deployment, and the armored guardians of the Legiones Astartes was measured. Each action was noted, each alteration to their daily routines absorbed and interpreted. They had endured isolation for countless generations, and the rhythm of their lives had been conditioned by time and restraint. To them, sudden change could be more dangerous than any external threat. The War Master permitted the observation to continue. He had witnessed similar patterns countless times across the Great Crusade. Compliance was not achieved merely by the presence of authority. It required integration of expectation and understanding. The inhabitants of a world must see, comprehend, and recognize the Imperium's purpose without feeling coercion. Only then could loyalty endure beyond the immediacy of arrival. Every measure of patience reinforced the permanence of unity. Reconnaissance craft continued their careful surveys. Sensors penetrated urban centers, forests, and plains alike. They detected activity patterns, energy flows, and environmental stability. No signs of deception were found, yet the fleet's officers remained vigilant. Patience did not imply negligence. It required continual evaluation, and even the smallest irregularity demanded scrutiny. For the War Master, the measure of a world's readiness was not how quickly it complied, but how thoroughly it demonstrated understanding and consistency in its actions. Astropathic transmissions flowed steadily between orbit and the surface. The inhabitants' responses, cautious but precise, conveyed comprehension without urgency. Language was established through measured repetition, symbols confirmed by repeated patterns, thought transmitted across the void without distortion. Communication, once a tentative bridge, had become a conduit. The world was beginning to speak in terms compatible with the Imperium, yet it retained the quiet resilience of its own centuries-long development. The War Master observed from the command deck. He did not intervene. Observation was a form of judgment, and judgment required detachment. The Imperium's authority was vast, yet it achieved permanence through the careful orchestration of choice rather than coercion alone. Each system that entered compliance strengthened the web of unity, but that strength was contingent upon the perception of sincerity and continuity. To force compliance prematurely would destabilize the foundation. Below, administrators prepared facilities for the permanent integration of the world. Communication relays were calibrated, power networks aligned with Imperial specifications, and astropathic nodes reinforced to ensure continuous connection with distant systems. Specialists moved among urban centers and agricultural regions alike, guiding processes that would ensure seamless participation. Their work was precise and unobtrusive, designed to minimize disruption while establishing lasting integration. The Legiones Astartes maintained a quiet presence. They moved among the deployment zones without interference, their armored forms visible but unassertive. To the inhabitants, they were symbols of authority rather than agents of enforcement. Observation was sufficient. Their silent vigilance reinforced the concept of order without requiring immediate action. Even as the fleet waited, the War Master considered the larger pattern of the Great Crusade. Worlds were not mere objects to be claimed. They were repositories of knowledge, memory, and resilience. Each world integrated brought not only material strength, but confirmation of humanity's continuity. The galaxy was vast, and each instance of compliance was a step toward unifying scattered fragments into a coherent whole. Yet the process demanded caution. Patience ensured permanence. Impatience invited fragility. Reconnaissance reports noted subtle shifts. Power usage stabilized, energy output became predictable, and astropathic responses arrived on regular schedules. These indicators, though minor in isolation, demonstrated adaptation. The inhabitants were aligning themselves with the Imperium not out of fear, but through recognition of shared purpose. This alignment, achieved through observation and dialogue, was a true measure of success. At last, the final stages of integration began. Supply networks were linked, administrators assumed their posts, and astropathic communication solidified. The planet's voice joined the Imperium's continuous chorus without interruption. Its silence, once enduring for centuries, had been transformed into consistent participation. The process had been gradual, deliberate, and unhurried, and it ensured stability beyond the immediate presence of the fleet. The War Master allowed himself the briefest acknowledgement of completion. He did not dwell upon it. The Great Crusade advanced continuously, and each success was a step toward the next challenge. Patience had yielded certainty. Loyalty had been earned through observation, guidance, and measured engagement rather than coercion. And so, the fleet prepared for departure. Engines awakened, sensors aligned, and navigators charted the course toward the next unknown system. Below, the world continued its routines, now intertwined with the Imperium. Its isolation ended without disruption to the life it had maintained for generations. Its compliance was complete, yet achieved with care, ensuring that understanding and trust would endure beyond the moment. In silence, the War Master watched as the stars stretched forward, endless and unbroken. Behind lay a world now fully integrated. Ahead lay the uncertain reaches of the galaxy. The Great Crusade moved steadily onward, carrying humanity's unity deeper into the void, guided by patience, vigilance, and the quiet certainty that every measured action strengthened the Imperium's eternal purpose. The fleet moved onward, its immense bulk threading silently through the void, a web of steel and purpose stretching across the darkness. Engines pulsed in rhythm with one another, their vibrations subtle yet constant, a heartbeat of motion that resonated throughout the vast corridors of each vessel. Outside, distant stars glimmered like cold beacons, their light indifferent to the passage of humanity beneath them. The War Master regarded these points of illumination not as destinations, but as markers along an endless journey of reclamation and order. The vastness of space offered no comfort. Its emptiness was absolute, yet within the emptiness, the Imperium found its purpose. Each star, each system, represented both potential and uncertainty. Some worlds waited quietly for contact. Others resisted even distant recognition. Each demanded careful observation, precise judgment, and measured action. The Great Crusade had taught the War Master that the measure of success was not merely the presence of imperial authority, but its permanence, secured through vigilance, patience, and understanding. Reports from reconnaissance vessels indicated a system lying at the edge of known charts. Its sun was young, shining with bright, untested light, and its planets moved in precise orbits around it. One in particular attracted attention. The third from the star, a terrestrial world with oceans dark and deep, continents irregular yet stable, and atmospheric conditions suitable for human habitation. Sensors suggested the presence of intelligent life, though its scale and organization remained unclear. The War Master authorized a cautious approach. Smaller craft, nimble and equipped with advanced sensors, moved forward to investigate. Their instruments probed the planet's surface, identifying structures and detecting movement patterns. The data suggested organized settlement, though the society appeared neither expansive nor aggressive. Power readings were sporadic but functional, hinting at a civilization capable of endurance yet untested by contact with the greater Imperium. Observation revealed more than numbers. It revealed adaptation. The inhabitants, though long isolated, had preserved stability. Their cities were arranged with purpose. Their energy use was deliberate and restrained. For centuries, they had endured without external influence, shaping their society to survive. Now, the Imperium had returned, and its presence would test that resilience. The War Master ordered a measured descent of envoys. Their vessel pierced the upper atmosphere with controlled precision, disturbing the clouds only minimally. The craft carried representatives trained not for combat, but for patience, observation, and engagement. They were to establish first contact with care, to allow understanding to form naturally, and to ensure that loyalty could be secured without coercion. Their role was delicate. They were the first bridge between isolation and unity. The world below responded cautiously. Signal flickered to life, irregular but persistent, indicating recognition of the approaching presence. Individuals moved within the cities, observing the descending vessel with measured attention. There was no panic, no alarm, only awareness. Centuries of isolation had conditioned the population to maintain equilibrium, and the sudden presence of the Imperium did not provoke immediate reaction. Instead, it was acknowledged, analyzed, and considered. The first transmissions between the envoys and the inhabitants were deliberate. Each message, symbolic and structured, built upon the previous, forming a foundation for communication. The inhabitants responded gradually, fragments of recognition forming into coherent understanding. Words, though shaped by generations of isolation, bore the same underlying meaning: comprehension of the Imperium's arrival and intent. From orbit, the War Master observed without interference that he understood that the success of the operation depended upon measured attention. The Imperium did not demand compliance through force alone. It earned loyalty through observation, guidance, and respect for the continuity of a civilization's life. The first steps of integration were ongoing. Communication relays established, astropathic node prepared, administrators positioned to guide the transition. Each action was deliberate, calibrated to avoid disruption while ensuring permanence. The Legiones Astartes maintained their presence with disciplined restraint. Their armored forms moved among the landing zones, observable yet unassertive. They were symbols, not enforcers. Their silence reinforced the authority of the Imperium without coercion, their vigilance a constant reminder that order was inescapable, yet measured. Even as the envoys worked, the War Master considered the broader pattern of the Crusade. Worlds reclaimed were not merely territories. They were repositories of culture, memory, and potential. Integration required observation, patience, and restraint. Any misstep could provoke resistance. Any disruption could weaken the fragile continuity upon which the Imperium relied. Each system that joined the Imperium strengthened it, yet each also demanded careful stewardship. At last, the inhabitants formally acknowledged imperial authority. Their compliance was neither hurried nor forced. It emerged through understanding and recognition of shared destiny. The world's voice joined the Imperium's chorus, ending centuries of isolation without conflict. The fleet prepared for departure. Engines awakened, systems aligned, and the next course through the stars was plotted. The planet remained beneath them, integrated and enduring. Its people guided yet unharmed, their loyalty secured through care and vigilance. The War Master remained upon the command deck, silent and observing. Beyond lay the infinite void, filled with countless worlds yet to be reached. The Great Crusade continued, not as conquest alone, but as careful, deliberate restoration. Every success was a measure of patience and foresight. Every integration reinforced the Imperium's unity. And as the fleet moved onward, the shadows between stars stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to the continuation of humanity's vast unification, a journey that would carry the Imperium ever deeper into the unknown, guided by purpose, vigilance, and the quiet certainty of command. The fleet drifted through the vast darkness between stars, a collection of immense vessels moving in silent precision. Their engines emitted the low hum of controlled power, vibrations that extended through the hulls and corridors, a subtle reminder that motion and authority were intertwined. Stars gleamed distant and indifferent, casting light upon the Imperium's advance without acknowledgment of its significance. Yet for the War Master, every point of illumination was a marker, a reference to both possibility and responsibility. The Great Crusade pressed onward, and each system approach was both a promise and a challenge. Reports arrived from the vanguard vessels, detailing systems at the fringe of known space. Some worlds had retained populations isolated for centuries, while others had succumbed to collapse, leaving traces of civilization in ruins or memory alone. Each report carried both information and implication. Isolated worlds could yield cooperation if approached with patience, while they could resist and require containment. The War Master considered each carefully, weighing the scales of risk and reward, understanding that the measure of success was not conquest alone, but the permanence of compliance and the endurance of loyalty. A system of particular interest emerged among the reports. Its sun bright and stable, its planets orbiting with precise predictability. The third world from this star exhibited traces of habitation. Sensors suggested cities or structured settlements, though power output was limited and irregular. The civilization's activity was discernible but restrained, indicating resilience and long-term stability in isolation. It was a world capable of endurance, yet untested by external authority. The War Master authorized cautious engagement. Reconnaissance craft descended first, moving with deliberate care through the upper atmosphere. Their instruments probed the surface for life, artificial structures, and energy signatures. Initial scans revealed patterns of habitation, geometrically arranged cities, stable power grids, and the careful allocation of resources. Nothing suggested aggression, but the subtle rhythms of activity indicated a society unaccustomed to contact with the Imperium. Observation remained paramount. Compliance could not be imposed without risking destabilization. After sufficient data had been collected, the envoys descended. Their vessel moved with precise control, disturbing the upper clouds minimally as it approached landing zones pre-selected for safety and accessibility. Within the hull, the representatives carried no weapons beyond those necessary for protection. Their role was observation and communication, an extension of the Imperium's authority through presence rather than coercion. They were trained to measure patience, understanding, and engagement, ensuring that every interaction preserved the stability of the world beneath them. The inhabitants responded cautiously. Signals flickered to life as the population registered the arrival. Their movement within the cities was deliberate and measured, displaying neither alarm nor aggression. Centuries of isolation had instilled resilience and equilibrium. Sudden appearance of foreign authority was met not with panic but with observation. The first communications were fragmentary, symbolic, and deliberate. Slowly, a bridge of understanding was formed. Messages were exchanged, patterns verified, and comprehension established. The Imperium's presence was understood, its purpose recognized, and the concept of unity began to take root. From orbit, the War Master monitored each transmission, weighing the flow of information with measured attention. The success of the operation depended not upon immediate response, but upon the endurance of the understanding established. The integration process demanded time, restraint, and vigilance. Communication relays were positioned, astropathic node prepared, and administrators ready to guide the transition. All infrastructure was designed to support continuity without disruption, ensuring that the population's adjustment would proceed smoothly. The Legiones Astartes maintained their presence with quiet authority. Their armored forms were visible but unobtrusive, a constant reminder that the Imperium's order existed without immediate imposition. Their silent vigilance reinforced compliance while minimizing interference, demonstrating that authority could be both absolute and measured. As the envoys and administrators established the preliminary structures, subtle patterns emerged. The population adjusted gradually, integrating the Imperium's presence into their routines rather than allowing it to dominate. Signals stabilized, energy output became predictable, and participation in communication networks increased. Compliance was not enforced but owned, a reflection of patience and careful oversight. The War Master reflected on the significance of these operations. Each world reclaimed was more than a location. It was a repository of history, knowledge, and human resilience. Integration was achieved not through fear, but through attention and the measured application of authority. Every action had been deliberate, every observation intentional. Success was a product of vigilance and foresight, and even in triumph, constant awareness remained essential. Finally, formal acknowledgement of the Imperium was received. The inhabitants recognized the Emperor's authority, consented to integration, and began participation in the broader network of humanity. Their silence, once enduring across centuries, had transformed into a consistent voice within the Imperium's chorus. Stability had been preserved, and loyalty achieved through patient observation and deliberate engagement. The fleet prepared to depart. Engines activated gradually, sensors aligned, and navigators plotted the course toward unexplored systems. The world below, now integrated, would endure within the Imperium's vast structure. Its isolation ended without disruption or conflict. Its loyalty had been earned and its compliance confirmed. Yet the process had reinforced the necessity of vigilance and patience. The War Master stood in quiet observation, aware that beyond the system lay countless worlds yet to be encountered. Each held its own challenges, histories, and potential for resistance or acceptance. The Great Crusade would continue, and with it, the steady unification of humanity under the Emperor's vision. Success depended upon discipline, judgment, and perseverance, and the journey would stretch through the stars unbroken. And as the fleet moved into the darkness beyond, the silent weight of command rested upon the War Master. Each decision, each observation, and each measured step reinforced the Imperium's continuity. The galaxy remained vast, but humanity's unity advanced steadily, carried onward by certainty, vigilance, and the quiet authority of those entrusted to guide it. The stars ahead remained indifferent, yet beneath their light, the Great Crusade endured, an unending march of patience, order, and the careful shaping of humanity's destiny.